All right, let's dive right into today's explainer because we are unpacking a mystery that is just absolutely chilling. It starts with a very real, grounded aviation tragedy, but then it escalates into a supernatural phenomenon that is honestly hard to wrap your head around. I mean, we've all heard those classic ghost stories, right? A single person seeing a fleeting shadow in the dark. But what if the story didn't just involve one isolated witness?
Seriously, imagine an apparition that isn't just lurking in a creepy dark room for one unlucky person to stumble upon, but is actually communicating with an entire cabin of passengers and crew all at the exact same time. This isn't just a spooky campfire tale. This is a deeply mysterious, completely unsolved event in aviation history, where over 100 people didn't just see a ghost, they literally heard it speak. And the truth behind why this happened is far more terrifying than the haunting itself.
So, to understand how we got here, we need to look at part 1, the tragic crash of Flight 401.
Picture this. It's 1972. Flight 401 departs from New York, heading down to sunny Florida. The plane is in the hands of Captains Albert and Robert. These guys are highly experienced veterans of the sky. The flight is totally routine. Zero issues right up until their landing approach. They suspect they have a faulty landing gear, so ground control tells them to pull up, engage the autopilot, and enter a holding pattern just to safely troubleshoot the issue.
It's honestly terrifying how fast a tiny glitch can turn into a total nightmare. While the crew is distracted, frantically trying to fix the landing gear, someone accidentally bumps the autopilot lever. Just a bump, and it disengages. But because they are so intensely focused on the landing gear, nobody notices. By the time they actually realize what's happening, the plane is already in a rapid, fatal descent. It was way too late to pull up. The plane crashed.
The fallout was just absolutely devastating. Out of 163 passengers and 12 crew members on board, only 75 people survived. Everyone in the cockpit, the entire flight crew, perished in the crash, along with 2 of the 10 flight attendants. At the time, this was considered the most horrifying disaster in aviation history, and it was entirely caused by one tiny, unnoticed mistake. But as tragic as this was, the true mystery of Flight 401 was actually just beginning.
Which brings us to part 2, the salvage parts.
Now you might be wondering, what happens to a plane after a crash like that? Well, as time passed, the airline was looking to recover from the massive financial hit, and they made a highly controversial decision. They combed through the devastating wreckage of Flight 401 and actually salvaged all the perfectly working scrap parts. Then, they installed those recycled parts into their brand new planes, with a huge concentration of them going to a specific plane designated Flight 318.
And that sets the stage for part 3, the hauntings on Flight 318. Okay, so at first, everything is completely normal on Flight 318. But then, an air hostess is walking down the aisle, serving passengers, and she approaches a section of the plane that is supposed to be totally empty. Except, sitting right there in a passenger seat is a man in a full pilot's uniform. She doesn't think much of it initially, just takes his order, but then she gets a weird feeling. Why is a pilot sitting out here? She heads to the cockpit to double-check, and to her absolute shock, both active pilots are safely in their seats flying the plane. So who on earth did she just speak to? She rushes back to the passenger cabin, but the seat is completely empty.
This is where it gets super weird. What makes this so chilling are the 2 wildly different perspectives of what just happened. The air hostess firmly believes she was taking an order from a pilot, but a passenger sitting nearby, they just watched her walk up to an empty seat and start talking to thin air. The passenger even said they thought she was just practicing a speech or talking to herself. Obviously, she freaks out and confides in her colleagues. Shockingly, the other flight attendants confirm they'd experienced the exact same thing, seeing a pilot in that specific seat, only for him to vanish. Word spreads like wildfire, and soon crew members are terrified to even step foot on this specific plane.
That leads us right into part 4, the Phantom's Warning.
Eventually, the crew can't just avoid the plane forever. It's the summer holidays, and Flight 318 is packed to the brim. Back in the galley, an air hostess named Faye Merriweather is working frantically. She's got exactly 2 hours to prepare and heat meals for 180 hungry passengers. The cabin lights are dim, the passengers are quiet, and she is totally 100% focused on getting the food heated up in the oven.
As Faye reaches out to open the oven door, she just freezes. Staring right back at her in the reflective glass of the oven door is a face, a man's face, and he is speaking directly to her, repeating this terrifying warning. Careful. This flight might catch fire. Faye is absolutely paralyzed. She's just standing there, watching this ghostly reflection repeat the warning over and over again.
Finally snapping out of it, Faye completely panics. She sprints out of the galley and literally drags the flight engineer back to look at the oven. You'd think he just brushed it off as exhaustion, right? Nope. He looks into the reflection and instantly recognizes the face. He says, "I know this man. This is my old friend." The face in the reflection belonged to Don Repo, the flight engineer who had tragically died in the crash of Flight 401.
And this is the kicker. It wasn't just Fang's imagination. The flight engineer saw Don Repo, the other flight attendants saw him, and it didn't stop there. Over 100 passengers on that packed summer flight saw the apparition standing there, and they all heard the exact same chilling warning echoing through the cabin. Careful, this flight might catch fire. It was a literal mass supernatural sighting by over 100 people simultaneously.
So what happens next? Let's look at Part 5, a lingering mystery.
The crew does not mess around. They take Don Repo's warning incredibly seriously and request to land immediately. Maintenance crews tear the plane apart looking for any fire hazards, but find absolutely nothing wrong. The plane is perfectly clean. So, assuming it was a false alarm, they clear the plane for its next flight. But on its very next takeoff, the engines completely fail mid-air. The plane is essentially dying in the sky. The crew is desperately trying to revive the engines, but then they remember Don Repo's warning. They realize that if they force the engines to restart under these conditions, the plane is absolutely going to catch fire. Because they listened to the ghost, they didn't force the engines. They managed to stabilize the aircraft and land safely. Don Repo, acting from beyond the grave, had just saved thousands of lives. He didn't want anyone else to suffer the fate he did. At this point, the airline literally cannot deny what's happening. They make a massive, historic decision. They ordered the immediate removal of every single spare part salvaged from Flight 401 from all of their active planes. They finally realized the spirits of the deceased crew were somehow attached to these parts. Plus, a highly religious crew member on Flight 318 actually took matters into his own hands, bringing holy water on board and performing a full-blown exorcism on the aircraft to protect the passengers. After the parts were ripped out and the exorcism was performed, the apparitions on Flight 318 stopped completely.
Now, wild paranormal stories and haunted locations aren't just limited to the skies. In fact, our source material notes a terrifyingly similar, massively haunted location right in India, which actually bears the title of India's most haunted place. Got any guesses what place that is? Drop your best guess in the comments below, and the first correct answers will get a special shout-out in our future explainers.
But before we sign off, I've got one last super unsettling thought to leave you with. While the airline claimed they removed all the salvage parts from Flight 401, a lot of aviation historians believe some of those parts are actually still circulating in the global aviation supply chain today. So the next time you're sitting on an airplane and you suddenly feel a freezing chill down your spine, just remember you might not be sitting alone. The spirit of Don Repo might just be sitting right next to you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and stay curious.